How are you doing? This is David W. Williams, also known as Diamond Dave. And the question you want to ask yourself this weekend and this coming week is 7% employment going to be the new target? And the reason why you want to ask yourself that question is you want to kind of understand where do you fit into that particular calculation. And what I want you to understand is that this week that currently passed, we're getting ready to go into a new week, but over the week that currently passed, the work week, we had a lot of our politicians and a lot of our central bank heads talking about what direction the economy was going to move into. And the average person may have missed this conversation because it may not be a part of their community. It may not be the type of things that they normally like to discuss on a regular basis. However, these conversations did take place and they're actually real. So when we're watching this particular video, which we're going to kind of break down some of this dialogue, the question I want you to keep asking yourself is that, where do I fit in this 7% unemployment target? And you want to keep asking yourself that question over and over again. And the next question I want you to ask yourself while we're watching this, right, is what questions did you have this week? Right? What conversations did you have this week? What did you talk about? What were the things that you thought were important? Because what we're going to show you is that in front of your face, in public, not behind closed doors, people are discussing how you're going to be economically either empowered or economically disempowered. And you have decided that it's not important. And I understand why it may not be important, because we got the data recently that the average American is reading on maybe a sixth grade level. So their literacy is really not that great. And a lot of the information that we're talking about is in print. But I want you to continue to ask yourself, first question, in this 7% unemployment target, where do I fit into? And then also ask myself, what conversations did I have this week? What was I talking about this whole week that just passed? What did I say was important to me? What did I feel like was the most important conversation for me to be having? What was getting my focus? What was getting my attention? Okay. And then we're going to kind of break this down. And then I'm going to give you an opportunity at the end of this particular broadcast for you to give me your analysis of it. And what would you do if you were in the position of the central bankers or the government? Because many times we'll critique what these people are doing, but we won't ask ourselves, if I was in this position, what would I be doing? And if you don't know what you would be doing in their position, I understand you have a right to critique them because they are your elected officials, even though Chairman Powell is an appointee. But many people have given the responsibility of their life away to another group of people just so they can complain about what they're doing. But they never ask themselves, if I was in this position, what would I be doing if I had to make these decisions? Because often in these type of environments, it can be difficult to make it to where nobody ends up taking some sort of loss. So then the question you want to ask yourself is, who's going to take the loss? And then why are the same people taking the loss over and over and over again throughout the history of this particular country? And some of that was spoken to in this particular dialogue, but you got to kind of catch it. Right? Now, really quickly, before we get into the content, you know that this particular broadcast is being sponsored by www.thehighestpaid.online. And it's going to kind of relate to what we're talking about today. Many people, if this thing goes the way in which people are projecting, they're going to find themselves unemployed at the end of the year, and they're not going to know what to do until somebody decides to hire them again. And the one group of people in this particular economy, they have the most amount of, I would say, velocity, either positive or negative, based on how the economy's doing. And it's because during the good times, they're not developing the skill sets to put themselves in a position to tide them over when things get rough in the economy. I don't care which direction this economy goes, right? I'm going to show you this weekend how we got money off the banking situation. I don't care if the bank goes bankrupt, goes defunct. I don't care. I'm going to make money off of it anyway. Why? Because I know how to position myself in this particular environment. And I learned how to do that by trading the options market, right? So really quickly, we got a sale on our highest paid part-time job in the world core course. That sale is going to run to the end of this month, so you still got some time, but you don't have all the time in the world. You can get 30% off. March 30 is the code. The value of the content is way greater than the cost. And I'm going to give you some heads up. I was talking to Teachable last week. They put me into a little program with other people that are, doing a certain level of numbers on Teachable. And one of the things they kind of told me is, David, you're giving a lot away. They kind of told me, David, the way in which we want you to scale, you giving a little too much to scale, the way we've seen people scale in your same situation. And we're going to kind of talk about that later on, right? Because I'm going to show you how when you get in different environments, the conversation is different a lot of times, and it has nothing to do with the color of skin, religion, sexuality, yada, yada, yada. because of the focus of people in that environment. But we're going to leave that for later this week. We're going to get back to this particular platform, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to break this video down. And again, I'm going to ask you, how do you fit into this particular 7% inflation or 7% unemployment target? And then what conversations did you have this week while this was going on? Okay. And then I'm going to also allow you, and I want to really encourage you, right? I'm not an asshole. I'm not a nasty person. I'm really not. I work very hard to make sure that I'm not that kind of person anymore. But we can respectfully disagree. But I want to always challenge you that how do you put yourself in scenarios where your ability to understand things is being challenged, not just everybody's just agreeing with me and nobody's really trying to elevate where I'm at. But everybody's on YouTube talking about leveling up. But when we have conversations about how you should level up, nobody can help you. And what makes me different than a lot of people, male and female, is I don't want a world where women don't utilize their intellectual ability, because as from an economic standpoint, as an economist, it doesn't help your society if only one segment of your population is using their brain power to propel the society. But what we see in this world is a lot of people just want to fall back, male and female. They want a world where they just can lean back and just enjoy life. And if they can just get by on how they look, they think that's sufficient. I'm here to tell you that's not going to work in this new era that we're going into, because how you look is not going to be enough of a trump card to get you through the door. But that's a different subject. So let's go ahead and get into the video, because I don't want to ramble.
When Congress spends money, it stimulates the economy, does it not?
Well, it would depend on whether that's funded by tax increases or not. But so if there's a spending that's not accompanied by taxes, would have a net at the margin stimulative effect.
Well, and when Congress borrows money to spend even more, that stimulates the economy even more, does it not?
At the margin, yeah.
Okay. If Congress reduced the rate of growth in its spending and reduced the rate of growth in its debt accumulation, it would make your job easier in reducing inflation, would it not?
I don't think fiscal policy right now is a big factor driving inflation at this moment, but it's absolutely essential that we do slow the pace of growth, particularly for the areas of the.
All right, let's try to unpack this. I'm not trying to trick you. You're raising interest rates. You're raising interest rates to slow the economy, are you not?
Yes, to cool the economy off.
And one of the ways you measure your success, other than fluctuation in gross domestic product, is the unemployment rate. Is it not?
Yes, one of the measures.
Okay. So in effect, I'm not being critical. When you're slowing the economy, you're trying to put people out of work. That's your job, is it not?
Not really. We're trying to restore price stability.
No, you're trying to raise
wages.
You're trying to raise the unemployment rate. That means I know you don't like the phrase, so let me strike it. You're trying to raise the unemployment rate, are you not?
No, we're not trying to raise it. We're trying to realign supply and demand, which could happen through a bunch of channels, like, for example, just job openings.
All right, let me put it another way, okay? The Economist did a wonderful study.
Okay, so I want to stop that right there. The first question I want to ask you that's watching this. First, do you read? Right? First, do you read? Second, do you read platforms like The Economist? Right? So everybody that bought my course, I figured out a way for you to get The Economist for free. Don't tell nobody. Right? Because we don't need the feds looking at us like that. But the question I want to ask you is that, do you read The Economist? Right? Because what I've been telling people for years is that, and something that you will learn, and I've been telling people for years, is that once you change where you're at in this society, the conversation changes. So this is why you see Ellen DeGeneres in a skybox with the Bushes. Why? Because Ellen DeGeneres is wealthy. So her desires for where she's trying to go in her life is different, right, than somebody else that may be in her similar situation but don't have her wealth. So she's in a skybox with the Bushes. Why? Because her conversation has changed. So what I try to get people to understand is that the change often that you want to see has to start with you internally. And then once you start moving a different way in the world, your whole conversation will change. So then the information that you need to stay on top of your game is different. So you got a congressperson or a senator, I think he's a senator from Louisiana. He's asking him, well, the Economist said, well, how many people that you're dealing with, right, that you're looking at in social media, that you're giving your attention to, are quoting The Economist, right? Because do they even think you even know what that publication is? So that's what I really want to try to hammer in. A lot of times what's coming out of your mouth and what's dictating what's going on inside your head is the information that you're putting inside your brain, right? And so when we have 130 million Americans that's reading at a 6th grade or lower, it often speaks to what we're seeing in the world today. Because they couldn't read The Economist to save their life. So then therefore they can't even get the different information to get a different perspective on the world. Let's keep going.
They looked at 10 disinflationary periods in America going all the way back to the 1950s. Disinflation is what you're trying to do. It's a slowing in the rate of inflation. Am I right?
Yes.
In other words, prices don't go down, just don't go up as fast. Deflation is when prices actually go down. You're trying.
So something that we talked about really quickly is when we start talking about disinflation or really combating inflation, what people have to understand is the price don't have to go down. The price just has to stop going up. And so I told everybody that, went to college, most people, not everybody, but a lot of people have taken either algebra or what we call calculus. We learned as a rate of change or the acceleration of the rate of change. And the rate of change as H approaches 0. And understand that what they're really looking to do is slow down the increase of inflation. They're not really looking to make the prices come back down. And you know that because we know gas today is not the same price it was 10 years ago. Therefore, if they can just stop an increase or an acceleration in prices and make prices sit flat, eventually what will happen is the consumer will start to adjust to the new prices the same way everybody has adjusted to the new prices. Because I remember when you could get gas for $2.50 a gallon, you can't get that now. I remember you could get a can of tuna for 50 cents. You can't get a can of tuna for 50 cents. But what we don't want, right, is for prices to keep spiking, keep spiking, keep spiking. So I want a lot of people to understand, if your food budget is currently stretched, it doesn't mean that the prices are going to go down. It means that we just may keep your food budget exactly where it's at. And then eventually you will just adjust to the food prices, right? And so that's what you want to understand, is that their role is not to make prices go down. Their role is to try to figure out how to stop prices from continuing to spike up. We don't want these spikes in prices. We can't have that volatility in pricing, right? Especially across core goods and also across core services. All right, let's get back to it.
Trying to achieve disinflation, are you not?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Based on history, in the 10 times that we got inflation down, disinflation since the 1950s, in order to reduce inflation by 2%, unemployment had to go up 3.6%. Now that's history, is it not?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yes, the standard has been that there have been recessions and downturns when the Fed has tried to reduce inflation.
Now, right now, the current inflation rate is 6.4% and the current unemployment rate is 3.4%. Now, if history is right, I'm not asking you to again, blame anybody, but if history is right, unless you get some help, in order to get inflation down from 6.4% to, let's say, 4.4%, and the unemployment rate is going to have to rise to 7% based on history.
That's what the record would say.
Okay, so we're going to roll that back because I want y'all to hear that again. We roll that back to 349.
And the current unemployment rate is 3.4%. Now, if history is right, I'm not asking you to again, blame anybody, but if history is right, unless you get some help, in order to get inflation down from 6.4% to, let's say, 4.4%, and the unemployment rate is going to have to rise to 7% based on history.
That's what the record would say.
Okay, and so you see him ask that, and Jerome Powell says that's what the record would say. So they're already factoring in that there is a direct relationship between inflation and unemployment. And so if we need to lower inflation, we already have accepted that there's going to be a rise in unemployment around, he says, at 7%. From a historical standpoint, that's what the record's telling them, right? Because the Fed only has a certain amount of tools that they can utilize. They can't impact other areas, right? So that's what I want people to understand, is that this is happening. I want to say 10 o'clock in the morning. I want to say on a Tuesday. And so they're giving you what's going on. They're giving you their plan because they have to legally. But the question we want to continue to ask yourself is, what conversations did you have this week? Right? What conversations is your group having this week? But as I spend more and more time on social media, I understand that a big part of that 130 million that's at 6th grade or lower is the people on social media. So they're just caught in the wave of this. They don't even understand enough. And then somebody will present to them, well, it's the president's fault because prices are high. President don't have nothing to do with that. Right? President don't have nothing to do with that. So that's what I want people to really understand is when you're not focused on these areas, it can hurt you long term. All right, let's keep going back to it.
Okay. And to get inflation down to 2.2% based on history, an immutable fact, unemployment would have to go to 10.6%. Would it not?
No, I wouldn't.
That's what the record shows. That's what the history shows.
Yeah, I don't think that kind of a number is at all in play
I mean,
here.
I know you're reluctant to admit it, and you don't want to get in the middle of a policy dispute. But I think it's undeniable. It's undeniable that the only way we're going to get this sticky inflation down is to attack it on the monetary side, which you're doing, and on the fiscal side, which means Congress has got to reduce the rate of growth of spending and reduce the rate of growth of debt accumulation. Now, I get that you don't want to get in the middle of that fight. But the more we help on the fiscal side, the fewer people you're going to have to put out of work. Isn't that a fact?
Please answer.
It could work out that way.
Sir?
It could work out that way.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Reed of Rhode
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Fed has raised interest rates 8 times over the last year in what has been the most extreme rate hike cycle in 40 years. The Fed's goal is to slow inflation, and your tool, raising interest rates, is designed to slow the economy and throw people out of work. So far, you haven't tipped the economy into recession, but you haven't brought inflation entirely under control either. And maybe the reason for that is that other things are also keeping prices high, things you can't fix with high interest rates, things like price gouging and supply chain kinks and a war in Ukraine. But you're determined to continue to raise interest rates. So I want to take a look at where you're headed. In December, the Fed released its projections on the state of the economy under your monetary policy plan. According to the Fed's own report, if you continue raising interest rates as you plan, unemployment will be 4.6% by the end of the year, more than a full point higher than it is today. Chair Powell, if you hit your projections, do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
I don't have that number in front of me. I will say it's not
just
an
a math
intended
problem.
consequence. It's
Well,
not,
but it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose their jobs. People who are working right now, making their mortgages.
Okay, so another thing that we want to start right here. So we have 704. So 2 million more unemployed at 4%. Right? So once we get to 4%, we're going to have 2 million more unemployed. So then the question you want to ask yourself is that who are going to be those 2 million people? Right? Because it's just a math problem. So who are going to be the 2 million more? So we get to 4%, right? Unemployment. That really comes out to 2 million more. So then who do you think those 2 million more are going to fall in? And this is something I used to teach in my dark persuasion class. Many of us are not prepared to have conversations about how we're going to accomplish a goal, knowing that to accomplish the goal, people are going to get hurt in the mix of it. Right? We do a lot of individualized stuff. They're not talking about individualized stuff. They're talking about big numbers. But a lot of that is conditioned. Now, you learn this if you go into the military, they put you in a command position. But this is more on the financial side. And understand that in talking about how to get to this goal, it's going to impact people. Some people are going to be on the opposite side of this particular situation. It's not going to go well for them. Right? So what I want people to understand is that oftentimes we can't have the conversation, and we can't have the conversation without it turning into a word salad. And one thing about Jerome Powell that I do like about him, he understands how to be very concise in what he's talking about. Let's go ahead and get back to it.
So Chair Powell, if you speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people today who you're planning to get fired over the next year, what would you say to them? How would you explain your view of your job?
to people more that inflation is high. It's hurting this country suffering under high inflation, and we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
And putting 2 million people out of work is just part of the cost, and they just have to bear it.
Will working people be better off if we just walk away from our jobs and inflation remains 5-6%?
Okay, so that was a really good question. And so he asked that if we just walk away from our jobs, how would that impact working people? Right? Because, and we talked about before, it's a balance between trying to get the inflation rate down, knowing that it is going to cause unemployment, but asking ourselves, if we just leave it alone based on their tools, if we just leave it alone, how does it impact people where their prices keep going up and keep going up and keep going up? right? And so that's what people got to understand. These are the kind of decisions that people have to make in certain positions where there's no way that other people are not going to be negatively impacted by what we're doing. But what is going to cause us to actually get to the solution? And so this is what I tell people about this system. You based on this system, you got to have a certain level of unemployment. Your goal is not to be the people that are going to be unemployed. But the way this system is constructed, it can't employ everybody. It just can't, not the way it's constructed. So your goal is to make sure you're not going to be the people that are going to be unemployed, and you don't be the people that deal with constant or cyclical unemployment, or deal with the people that are underemployed. These are a lot of things that we deal with. Again, what conversations did you have this week? Right? Because these are the conversations they was having. So what was everybody else talking about this week that they thought was so important? Right? Let's get back to it.
Ask you about what happens if you do this. Since the end of World War II, there have been 12 times in which the unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point within 1 year, exactly what you're aiming to do right now. How many of those times did the U.S. economy avoid falling into a recession?
You know, it's not as black and white as very,
Just
very
looking at the numbers, it actually is pretty black
Alan
and white.
Blinder's written a book on this.
There have been 12 times that we've seen a 1 point increase in the unemployment rate in a year. That's exactly what your Fed report has put out as the projection and the plan based on how you're going to keep raising these interest rates. How many times did the economy fail to fall into a recession after doing that? Out of 12 times.
I think the number is 0.
I think the number is 0. That's exactly right. So then the question becomes, we've got 2 million people out of work. Can you stop it at 2 million people? History suggests that the Fed has a terrible track record of containing modest increases in the unemployment rate. Once the economy starts shedding jobs, it's kind of like a runaway train. It is really hard to stop. In fact, in 11 out of the 12 times that the unemployment rate increased by a full percentage point within 1 year, unemployment went on to rise another full percentage point on top of that. If that's what happens this time, we'd be looking at least 3.5 million people who would lose their jobs. So, Chair Powell, if you reach your goal and 2 million people get laid off by the end of this year, and then just like in 11 out of 12 times that unemployment has risen by a point in a single year, it keeps on rising. And then we've got 2.5 million people out of work. We've got 3 million people who get laid off. We've got 3.5 million people who get laid off. What's your plan?
Well, right now the unemployment rate is 3.4%, which is the lowest in 54 years. And we actually don't think that we need to see a sharp or enormous increase in unemployment to get inflation under control.
I'm looking at your projections. Do you call laying off 2 million people this year not a sharp increase in unemployment?
I would say 4.5%.
Explain that to the 2 million families who are going to be out of work.
We're not targeting any of that. But I would say even 4.5% unemployment is well better than most of the time for the last 70 years.
In other words, you don't have a plan to stop a runaway train if it occurs. Chair Powell, you are gambling with people's lives, and there's a pile of data showing the price gouging and supply chain kinks and the war in Ukraine are driving up prices. You cling to the idea that there's only one solution: lay off millions of workers. We need a Fed that will fight for families, and if you're not going to lead that charge, we need someone at the Fed who will.
Senator Vance of Ohio.
Okay, so the question we want to ask, and I wanted to ask the audience, and I know this is on a lag. The Fed is one part of a bigger puzzle of monetary policy dealing with inflation. For all my really astute people, right? What are 2 other ways, right? And I had this on the banner, so let me put this up here. What are 2 other ways the government can lower inflation? Not the Fed, right? But what are 2 ways the government can lower inflation? Because something Katrina talked about, and she's 100% correct. They're spending the money, but getting upset at him. But they got to do what they got to do because they got to be on the record saying I said this. But what are 2 other ways the government can lower inflation? Because the Fed is only one part of a puzzle, right? So the Fed can do their job, but if the government isn't really on board with it, it don't matter what the Fed does. But the person that's going to take the brunt is going to be the consumer and the person in American society. Those people are sitting inside these halls. They're not going to lose their job. They're going to keep their job. They're going to keep their benefits as long as they keep getting elected. So what people don't understand is that the Fed is only one part of the puzzle. They can do their job to the utmost, but if other people aren't doing their job, it won't matter what they do, right? But we know that when you ask other people to do their job, all of a sudden they got a million reasons why they can't do it, okay? So that's what I want people to understand. They blaming one party, but this one party doesn't have control over everything, right? So if everybody got on the same page, we could do this without it hurting the most amount of people. But the problem is everybody want to get what they want to get out of the deal, and they want somebody else to solve the problem. And it's not going to work that way. Okay, let's get back to the video.
Title. To Chairman Powell, thank you for coming and being such a good colleague and friend. I have a couple questions I'm going to try to get through quickly. Chair Powell, in a press conference last month, you stated, quote, "There is a lot of spending coming into the construction pipeline, both private and public, and so that's going to support economic activity," end of quote. How do you think the strong pipeline of funding from what the Democrats put together in passing the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, and the CHIPS Science Act will do to have economic activity this year and moving forward?
So I guess I was making the point that there are a lot of sources of demand that we can rely on, even though demand has been relatively increasing at a relatively modest rate. Part of it is—
Will this help in that demand?
Yes. I mean, there is state and local governments I mentioned are about—
So would you say this is a great thing that we've done coming from the left over
not for
here?
not for me to judge the merits of what gets done, but I'm just saying there's—
But it will contribute
there that will support that economic
and support it.
activity. Yeah.
So I'm going to assume from that that's a positive. Let me go to the second question. Chairman Powell, the Federal Open Markets Committee is projecting that unemployment will increase to 4.6% by the end of the year. And those costs, as we know, won't be borne equally. If we look at the ratio from the last time unemployment was 4.6% and compare it to our numbers now, it would mean that white unemployment would go up to about 0.9, but Black unemployment would go up by 2.3%. Does that sound somewhat accurate to you?
So we've talked about this multiple times. The unemployment by racial group is not across the board. There's disproportionate Black unemployment. So let me put that banner up real quick for people. Disproportionate Black unemployment. Regardless, some people say irregardless is not a word. Regardless of gender or biological sex. And everybody like to sit inside their little cubby hole and say, hey, we doing better than that other group. Yeah, it don't really work that way, right? This country, the way it's been set up is that Black unemployment is going to be disproportionately higher based on how many Black people are inside the United States. Now, we do have segments that are going to be higher than other segments. So Black men in a lot of major urban areas between 18 and 40 are a lot of times disproportionately the highest amount of people unemployed. But Black employment, right, as a group is always going to be higher than white employment. Now, you can split yourself into your little segment. The question is, individually, are you unemployment or firing resistant in this new economy? Because you cheerleading a bunch of people that don't have anything to do with your personal financial situation is not going to help your personal financial situation just because you may happen to be a man or a woman, right? But we already know, and I want you to keep listening because they're going to go into some other stuff that a lot of people don't follow, because we said before is that what conversations were they having this week? Okay, let's keep going.
Yes.
Can you address the disparity impact with that? And before you answer, let me go to the book and thank you that was put in our places together. You made it in this book with your signature on it, it is stated, however, while disparities return to pre-pandemic levels, there still remain significant disparities in absolute levels of employment across groups like African Americans and Hispanics. So can you address that?
I can. So right now, to your point, actually, African-American unemployment is, I think, 5.4%, which is just about as low as it's been since we started tracking it in 1972.
But differential from majority
Well,
by—
I'm going to say so that's 5.4, whereas the overall is 3.4, and that includes Blacks. So that means for whites is well lower than that. What happened?
Okay, so we got Black unemployment at around 5.4, right? We got overall unemployment at around 3.4. Anglo employment is going to be lower as a group than the average because we know they include everybody in that particular 3.4 number, right? So he's already telling you that Black unemployment, right, is already way higher than Anglo unemployment. And this is just how the situation is going to work, okay? And that's what I want you to understand. Question again, what conversations was you having this week? Let's keep going.
Happens is, so there's a persistent gap between Black and white unemployment, and also when unemployment goes up quickly in a recession, it goes up much faster for African Americans. When the economy grows again, it comes down faster. So that's just that's somehow embedded in our economy. We don't really have the best thing we can do is—
Okay, and the last thing for this particular segment, he said that it's embedded in the economy. So the question you want to ask yourself is that why is this Black unemployment rate higher than other groups? Why is it embedded in the economy? Right? And you want to kind of ask yourself that. Why is it embedded in the economy? And that's what people got to understand is that they've already factored in that these particular disparities are just a byproduct of the system that we're operating. and they don't know from where they're sitting how to change it, because it can't be changed from the federal government side, not federal government. It can't be changed from the Federal Reserve side. They don't have the tools to change it, but they've already factored in this is how this system is going to operate. So we just can do what we can do based on where we're sitting. All right, let's keep going.
Is achieve stable prices so that we can have long expansions. And what happens in those long expansions is that the labor market gets tight, sustainably tight, and we have historic lows in unemployment, including for African Americans.
Let me say thank you. And let me also, again, thank you. As you know, in the 117th, I was the chair of the NI committee, and let the record state that you always pushed for making sure that you understood and respected that. And in that, very minor and certainly personal to me, in this report, maybe those who helped you author it, I would like to see the areas that talks about unemployment, not under a title of special topics, but something that draws a little more attention to it as some of the others, just very minor. Last question I have. Can you tell me if the Feds is committed to working with the other agencies like the FDIC and the OCC to finalize a rule soon on CRA? Certainly that's something of great interest to many of my colleagues. So can you give us any updates on it or how the process is going or what we can expect?
Yes. So with Governor Brainerd's departure for the White House, I've asked Vice Chair Barr to take the lead in moving it forward. I would characterize it that there's essentially agreement between the three banking agencies on the changes to be made. That's all being written up and vetted. And at a certain point, members of the Board of Governors will be briefed on it. We'll vote on it.
Is there anything we can do to help with that?
No, I think we're hard at work on it, and it's going to take some months, but I think we're nearing we can see the airport, and we'll be landing.
That's a question I have. Can you tell me if the Feds is committed to?
And I want to repeat this part of the segment because I want to ask the audience, do you know what they're talking about? So she's going to ask him this question. He's going to respond to it. She's going to use certain terminology. I want to ask the audience, do you know what he's talking about, especially for the segment of the population that say they're the people that's opening the most businesses, right? So they're using this jargon. They're talking about this particular topic. Do you know what they're speaking to, what they're talking about? Okay, let's keep going.
To working with the other agencies like the FDIC and the OCC to finalize a rule soon on CRA. Certainly that's something of great interest to many of my colleagues. So can you give us any updates on it or how the process is going or what we can expect?
Yes. So with Governor Brainerd's departure for the White House, I've asked Vice Chair Barr to take the lead in moving it forward. I would characterize it that there's essentially agreement between the three banking agencies on the changes to be made. That's all being written up and vetted. And at a certain point, members of the Board of Governors will be briefed on it. We'll vote on it.
Is there anything we can do to help with that?
No, I think we're hard at work on it, and it's going to take some months, but I think we're nearing we can see the airport, and we'll be landing.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Presley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Powell, for joining us today and for your testimony. I'm going to focus my comments and my questions on the high costs that families in my district are seeing because of your interest rate hikes. Now, while the Feds acknowledge that higher interest rates are not the primary driver for the slowdown in price increases, you continue to raise interest rates, risking not only millions of jobs, but also a recession. Based on projections from the Fed, approximately 2 million people will lose their jobs. That's 2 million families who will struggle to put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads, and to make ends meet. But the economic hardship does not end there. Mr. Chair, I would like to request unanimous consent to submit a recent paper by the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland titled Post-COVID Inflation Dynamics into the record.
Without objection.
Chairman Powell, are you familiar with this publication? Yes or no?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Well, let me give you some context. In this paper, the Fed's own economists predict that reaching the 2% inflation goal that you have set will be impossible without causing a recession and spiking the unemployment rate to 7.4%, which translates to millions of working people losing their jobs. Now, Chairman Powell, many economists agree with me when I say that engineering a recession to bring inflation under control is not the right strategy, especially at a time when we are seeing inflation cool in real time, independent of your rate hikes. So on behalf of the people of this country, to prevent a recession, yes or no, Chairman Powell, will you pause future interest rate hikes?
We're not seeking to have a recession, and we don't think we need to have a recession to get
Respectfully,
back.
Will you pause interest rate hikes, yes or no?
I don't do yes or no on will I pause interest rate hikes. That's a serious question, and I can't tell you because I don't know all the facts. That's not.
Reclaiming my time. And in fact, it is a very serious question because it has a very serious implications. The people who will bear the brunt of an economic recession are our most vulnerable. We know from past experiences that recessions have catastrophic and deeply inequitable consequences. In fact, while some will catch a cold, others will catch pneumonia. But you know that, an economic cold or pneumonia. In fact, in your opening statement, you said, we will stay the course until the job is done. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Could you elaborate, what is this effect to communities, families, and businesses, these interest rate hikes?
Well, right now we're trying to bring down inflation on behalf of all those families. I think high inflation is hurting, particularly working families all around the country, very badly. And as you know, if you're on a very limited budget and you don't have a lot of excess earnings, when prices start going up, you're in trouble right away. People, middle and upper middle class people have more resources. So we think it's absolutely critical for the working people of this country that we get inflation back under control. And also, while we're at it, we have a dual mandate.
Apologies, Mr. Chair, just reclaiming my time here. Here's the thing. The most devastating impacts will be to our most vulnerable. Veterans to our most vulnerable. Veterans, the elderly, low-income workers, Black and brown workers, those who have often ignored and been neglected in the name of what you refer to as appropriate monetary policy. And yet, you assert that you will stay the course. It's unconscionable. And our most vulnerable workers and families cannot afford to wait for you to realize the harm that you were doing. In my opinion, this sounds more like the assertions of a greedy corporation than someone who has a public mission on behalf of the people of this country. So one more question with my remaining time here. Chairman Powell, another consequence of your interest rate hikes has been the increase of the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate to 6.6%, double of what it was 2 years ago. Do you see this widening inequity in the housing market as a problem? And what steps will you take to make housing more affordable? This is putting homeownership further and further out of reach for my constituents, new parents, millennials, people of color, contributing to inequities and the racial wealth gap. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, our policies do
Gentlemen,
affect.
penalties time's expired. Chairs can submit for the record or answer.
I'll briefly say that if I can, that interest rate policies affect interest-sensitive spending very directly. When we cut rates, they help housing. When we raise rates, you see the effect on housing.
Okay, so that's pretty much all the questions that he asked. I kind of really dealt with inflation and unemployment. And so that's kind of what we wanted to cover. So we talked about it was 3 hours on one, 3 hours on the other. I just edited those specific questions. A lot of people to me were just filibustering. But again, we want to kind of ask, what conversations did you have this week? Now, what we're going to go now is to, I think, the unemployment data that came out on Friday. Let me go ahead and pull that up real quick. And so we have unemployment situation summary, came out on March 10th, 2023. We have the unemployment at 3.6%. The number of unemployed persons at 5.9 million edged up. And then what we see is we kind of see like a ethnic or racial background, right? Unemployment rate for Hispanics, 5.3% increase in February. Unemployment rates for adult men, 3.3%, adult women, 3.2%, teenagers, 11%, whites at 3.2%, blacks at 5.7%, Asians, 3.4%, changed a little over a month. So we continue to see is that Black people carry a higher unemployment rate than every other group, right? We're a little bit above Hispanics, right? But we're way above everybody else. Okay. So if unemployment continues to spike up, what we want to try to figure out, and we can go do the research, is that when we've had higher unemployment, let's say 4%, right? Because we at 3.6, at 4%, what was historically the Black unemployment rate? Was it higher than 5.7 or was it lower than 5.7? Can we pull that data out of those segments? And that's what I want people to understand, right? So these conversations are going on in the middle of the day in public, but along with every other conversation. And so often those other conversations for a lot of people are winning out. And then when they wake up and they realize, well, you know what? My job no longer exists. The people that was calling me to come to work no longer coming to work. Things aren't going the way I thought they were going to go economically. The question you want to ask yourself is that what have you been paying attention to the past 6 to 12 months? It's not other people. It's you and what you've been involved in. So anytime you want to make a change, you got to start with you. Then the people around you will change. But it's never the other people. It's always you. Right? Just like I don't blame the people John Morant hang with. I blame John Morant. You grown man, you know what you're doing. Right? If you change your behavior, you'll change the people around you. I don't blame them other people. You grown. You're not a child. But we want to continue to get people to understand is that we've been saying on this platform for pretty much a year and a half, is that for them to get the inflation rate to a certain number that they say they're going to get it to, it's going to cause a lot more unemployment. And it's going to disproportionately or negatively disproportionately impact the group of people in this particular country that historically have a higher unemployment rate. While they sit around on YouTube and talk about how much money they got and they this, that, and the third, all the data shows us that this group of people are disproportionately have a higher unemployment rate than every other group. Right? And we're not talking about a group of people that came over to this country 10 years ago. Right? These are people who have a history entrenched in this particular society called America. But for some reason, they're always at a higher unemployment rate than pretty much every other group, even Hispanics, right? So that's what I want people to understand. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to read these comments. Like I said, the question we want to ask is that what would you do if you were Chairman Powell? If you want to come on and talk about that specific thing, that's it. That's all we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about everything else going on under the sun. You can come on and talk about that. So if you was in his position, what would you do? And what would you be willing to accept as the impact of what you're doing? That's the question. So if you want to talk about that specific topic, we can do that. Other than that, we're going to read these comments, man. We're going to get up on out of here.